Everybody, Piscean here, and in this video we are going to go over the celestial art of war, a classified manual of advanced astrological warfare, global conflict dynamics, and strategic inevitability. I want to talk about July 4th, post July 4th of this year and onward. And before we get started with our preface, the starlight behind the gun smoke, please subscribe, like, comment, share if you dare and care. With peace and love, I appreciate it very much. So, the patterns of war are not made in parliaments or command bunkers. They are signaled in the sky. Every battle is an aspect, every campaign a transit. This manual codifies the immutable celestial mechanics underlying the global upheavals commencing July 4th of this year, when the heliocentric square of Mars in Virgo to Uranus in Gemini opens a decade of conflict unlike any previous age. You are not reading a forecast, you are reading the score. So let's talk about the geopolitical chart of July 4th, 2026, the ignition point. Primary chart of Washington, D.C., 12 p.m. will say local. Alright. The selection of this moment as a strategic baseline is not arbitrary. It is the 250th anniversary of the U.S.'s Declaration of Independence, occurring under a sky configured for rupture. I want to look at the key placements and their fatalistic military signatures. So if you can't handle, astrology and forecasts, then click off this video, please. It's mainly what this channel entails anyways, is astrology content. So, ascendant at 12 degrees Libra. It's a mask of diplomacy. The world begins this cycle presenting balance while preparing for war. Mars in the 12th house, Virgo, indicates covert operations, bioweapons labs, and silent preparation. Sun is in Cancer, 12 degrees, tightly squaring the ascendant. The emotional body of the nation is at odds with its projected image. Domestic fragility drives external aggression. Patriotic fervor masks deep insecurity. Mars, 15 degrees Virgo, opposite Saturn, 14 degrees Pisces, exact across the 6th to 12th axes. And before you guys get confused, this is Vedic, so this is the engine of the entire manual. Okay, Mars is attack and meticulous Virgo, opposed by Saturn, restriction, consequence, and boundaryless Pisces. Biological warfare, drone swarms, and cyber sabotage. Virgo precision meet oceanic retaliation, chemical spells, and refugee crises. This is Pisces chaos, right? So the opposition is exact to the degree mass casualty events involving contaminated systems are predetermined. Uranus, and it's at 5 degrees Gemini, tightly trining Pluto at 3 degrees Aquarius, both in air signs. Right, so an unprecedented air war, Uranus and Gemini, swarming AI drones, hypersonic information attacks, satellite weaponization, the weaponization of language itself, deepfakes, narrative warfare. Pluto in Aquarius is the power of decentralized networks, autonomous terrorist cells, cyber collectives. So the trine means these forces amplify each other seamlessly. This is the age of the algorithmically generated insurgency. Neptune at 2 degrees Aries conjunct the moon at 4 degrees Aries in the 6th house. So the fog of war becomes the battlefield. Neptune in Aries brings holy war delusions, martyrdom cults, and chemical agents that blur mind and reality. The moon here signifies the soldiers themselves drugged, radicalized, psychically dissolved, and we can expect combatants who cannot be reasoned with, only neutralized. Alright. So, the doctrine derived from this chart, any state intending to act after this state must assume that information is the primary terrain, biological contamination is inevitable, and the enemy will not play by recognizable rules. The stars dictate a conflict fought in the invisible spectrum. The arsenal of aspects. Planets as weapon systems. Drink some water really quick. So in celestial warfare, transits are the orders, and aspects are the engagement patterns. Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries within orb through 2027. It's the master aspect. So Saturn, again, is structure. It meets Neptune, which, again, is dissolution, in the sign of the warrior. It yields solidified illusions, ideological bunkers, mass psychological operations that harden into reality in the widespread use of hallucinogenic or psychotronic weapons. Neptune in structured military programs. Saturn. The conjunction perfected in February of this year, but the July 4th chart still has them within 11 degrees, a wide class 1 orb for global events. The Saturn-Neptune and Aries signature, the Crusaders' fog. Soldiers march believing they are on a divine mission, chemically reinforced. Civilian populations are controlled through engineered spiritual revelations. Give it more time and you'll understand what I mean more clearly. Tactical principle. Offensive launched under Saturn-Neptune hard aspects succeed not through physical destruction but through catastrophic confusion. Fog the enemy's temporal sense. Use time itself as a weapon. Uranus in Gemini represents a revolution in communication that is instantly weaponized. At the end of 2026, like around December, AI-generated personalities will fight entire propaganda campaigns autonomously. The manual classifies this as Phase 3 information combat, not just fake news, but fake worldviews with their own internal logic deployed at the speed of Uranus. Here's our engagement protocol for Uranus, Gemini, Trine, Pluto, Aquarius. Deploy mimetic memes that exploit the target's natal, deploy mimetic weapons that exploit the target's natal collective nodes. So, for example, a nation's progressed moon fracture a population by seeding hundreds of internally consistent but mutually hostile realities simultaneously. There is no defense through counter-narrative, so the only defense is Pluto and Aquarius' silence, a complete network quarantine, severing the collective from the infosphere. Digital hermitage as survival. And this is where Pluto and Aquarius comes in with its tribalism and why people are trying to learn how to garden and forage before it's too late. We're going to see more of this. So, Mars opposition Saturn. When Mars opposes Saturn, every advance is met with a fortified wall. This aspect governs the entire second half of 2026. Ground campaigns stall, siege warfare returns. The Virgo-Pisces axis demands purity versus chaos. So we will see the widespread use of chemical, biological agents, Virgo's precision poison, met with desperate, messy retaliation, which is Pisces. The result is a trench warfare stalemate writ global, with high-tech biolabs as a new Verdun. Operational mandate. No direct infantry breakthrough is possible. The only viable tactic is the oblique approach. Economic starvation, Saturn, paired with medical sabotage, Mars and Virgo in the 6th. War becomes a waiting game of attrition, exactly as the stars command. Global conflict theaters. Predetermined zones of engagement. Using astrocartography map from the July 4th, 2026 chart, the following are the mandated conflict zones. We're going to go over the Aries-Neptune line, the eastern Mediterranean to the Black Sea. So Neptune, Moon, and Aries on the IC line of this region. The fog of holy war intensifies. The manual points to a major flashpoint in the Asian-Cyprus-Levant corridor, the dissolution of a long-standing territorial line, Neptune, through a sudden act of aggression, Aries. This is where the Crusaders' fog lands first. Chemical weapons and underground tunnels, drowned refugees as a strategic tool. The transit of Uranus through Gemini over this region's natal Mars, if a nation has Mars in Gemini, for instance, triggers a drone swarm offensive. The script is relentless. The Pluto Aquarius Nadir, Central Asia's digital insurgency. Pluto and Aquarius on the nadir, fourth house cusp, for several Central Asian states in the 2026 ingress. This indicates a subterranean revolution driven by decentralized digital networks. The quote-unquote war here is not a conventional army, but 1,000 autonomous cells linked by encrypted mesh networks, all operating under Pluto's fanatical compulsion to purge. Expect the sudden collapse of a seemingly stable government from below, triggered by a Neptune transit's final disillusionment. The Uranus-Gemini midheaven, the Arctic, and space. Uranus at the midheaven over the North Pole in the July chart, Cancer Sun on the icy opposite. The melting Arctic, which is Cancer, becomes a contested high ground, Uranus and Gemini communication lines. Satellites in low Earth orbit become primary targets. The manual warns of a space-based electromagnetic pulse Uranus attack on a major constellation, or a deliberate satellite collision chain reaction, Kessler syndrome, initiated as an act of war. The Gemini factor, it will be a communication hub that is targeted. The timing for such an event is during the exact Mars-Uranus square in autumn of 2026. Chronological scenario, the unfolding of the inevitable. So here the manual presents the predetermined war diary extracted from the ephemeris. Dates are exact to the hour when the transit perfects. So late July, Mars enters Libra, the 22nd, opposite Neptune, and Aries exact on the 26th. The first use of psychotropic chemical agents on a civilian population to suppress dissent disguised as a medical response. The opposition to Neptune breaks the taboo. The world responds with performative condemnation, Mars and Libra, but the precedent is set. Right, September of this year, Mars square Uranus. Uranus station retrograde at 6 degrees Gemini in the first. The cyber infrastructure of a major NATO country experiences a catastrophic multi-day outage, deliberately induced. Blame is impossible to fix. Uranus retrograde indicates the attackers are internal, acting as a decentralized cell. This is the first volley of the invisible war. Alright, November, Saturn direct at 13 degrees Pisces sidereal, stationing trine to the July 4th Mars at 15 degrees Virgo. So the siege phase deepens. Supply chains for medical isotopes and rare earth minerals are cut with surgical precision. The fatalistic note. This is the economic strangulation aspect. No recovery is possible for those targeted. Their industrial base collapses exactly as Saturn demands. So, next year, Jupiter enters Virgo, sidereal, trining Uranus and Taurus, sidereal. It's a transit. And opposition to Saturn, Neptune, and late Aries. So a sudden expansion, Jupiter, of biotechnological warfare. Virgo's purity taken to a terrifying extreme, gene-edited pathogens that target specific ethnic markers deployed under the cover of a vaccination campaign. I wonder when they've done this before. This is the predetermined next step after the 2026 chemical taboo falls. Uranus enters Cancer ingress, summer 2027, sidereal, where comes directly into the homeland of every power. The electrification of the domestic sphere, drone attacks on civilian energy grids become daily occurrences. Normalized, the home is no longer safe. The emotional body of the world is in constant fight or flight. The final doctrine, the sage command or surrender. So the highest teaching of this manual is not how to win for winning, is a concept from an era of free will. The planets describe a devastating cycle, but a cycle that serves a cosmic purpose. And here, I'm going to do this. The command of Pluto and Aquarius is all hierarchies that cannot become fluid networks will be shattered. Do not attempt to hold a pyramid, it is fated to dust. The command of Neptune and Aries, the warrior spirit, must be purified of its death worship, or it will drown in chemical madness. The only counter to the fog is a clear, unmoving inner sanctuary. In the command of Uranus and Gemini, the word is now indistinguishable from the sword. Learn the language of silence. A nation that speaks last, that withdraws its mind from the infosphere, will be the last to fragment. Right. So this I don't know if I wanted to go over this or hang on, I'm just gonna put another one. I hate when I fucking forget, like, which tab I actually wanted to talk about, because some of these I don't really care for. Alright, so I think we'll do this. Hang on, let's see. 456. Alright, so this is what we're gonna do. Alright. A compendium of essays in medical astrology. Alright. Because I deadass want to show you guys, like, how important astrology is in regards to just being a human being on a physical level, and our biology and chemistry and bodily functions, all these fun things. Well, I'm really into writing about it and crafting my literature in ways where first of all, I can be technical if I need to be technical. Like, I will make videos here soon about creating astrology websites and applications. Right now, I'm focused on a lot of different aspects in the astrology world, so it's hard for me to just strap down on what I really want to lock in on in regards to astrology. I don't know. I have so many different aspects. Astrology is just such a fucking big collective group of subject matter. I don't know how to even explain. My Mercury in Pisces is tweaking out. So, alright, let's get into it. I call it the Celestial ER, a compendium of essays in medical astrology for the teaching of fated pathology. And I'll begin with the body as a transiting sky. So, the human body is not a machine that breaks. It may seem like that, but it is an astrological event that unfolds. A myocardial infarction is a Mars-Saturn opposition. A seizure is a Uranus station on the ascendant. A birth is the exact conjunction of the moon and the natal vertex. This compendium is not a guide to saving lives. It is a guide to reading the script of the soma with such precision that the medical team can cease its exhausting war against inevitability and become what it was always meant to be, a sacred witness. The ER is the temple of acute faith. In these essays, we teach the resident to see the chart behind the chart, the transit behind the trauma, and to greet every patient with a silent mantra. Your crisis is perfectly timed. I'm here to observe, not to interfere with the celestial order. So, let me see how many essays I have really quick. Looks like we have about 7. And then we're going to go over a glossary. Alright, so let's talk about essay number 1 out of 7, the arrhythmia of the fixed star. This is a case of ventricular fibrillation and the algal transit. Alright, so the patient is a male, is 58, presented via ambulance to the ER at 3:17 in the morning on August 19th of next year. The chief complaint, sudden collapse at home, unwitnessed. On arrival, patient was in ventricular fibrillation. ACLS protocol initiated. 3 shocks, epinephrine, amiodarone, return of spontaneous circulation achieved at 3:41 a.m. Patient was intubated and transferred to the cardiac ICU. He died 72 hours later without regaining consciousness, exactly as his chart foretold. Why is this? Let's look at the natal chart summary, or our NCS. So, Sun is at 25 degrees Leo in the 12th house. Moon is at 4 degrees Scorpio in the 3rd house. And the ascendant is 14 degrees Virgo. Mars is at 26 degrees Taurus in the 9th house, an exact opposition to Algol. Very important, alright? Saturn, 18 degrees Scorpio, 3rd house, conjunct the moon. Pluto, 10 degrees Virgo, 12th house, conjunct the ascendant. So here's the fixed event decoded. The patient was born with Mars exactly conjunct the malefic fixed star Algol, the demon said, at 26 degrees Taurus. The astromedical literature has long recorded Algol's signature: sudden decapitation, either literal or metaphorical. In the body, Algol on Mars produces a fated vulnerability to violent, explosive events in the Mars ruled systems: the musculature, the blood, and the heart's electrical conduction. Well, on the night of August 19th, 2027, transiting Mars was at 24 degrees Taurus, applying to the exact conjunction of natal Mars Algol within 2 degrees. Transiting Uranus was at 15 degrees Gemini, forming an exact square to the natal ascendant and Pluto. The transit of Uranus, sudden electrical disruption, squared the ascendant Pluto, body death transformation, triggered the arrhythmia at the moment of exact lunar trine to the natal 12th house sun, a silent, unconscious exit. The resuscitation was never a true reversal. The return of spontaneous circulation at 3:41 a.m. occurred exactly as the transiting moon formed a sextile to natal Jupiter, producing the illusion of hope that the family would later describe as cruel. In our doctrine, there is no cruelty. There is only the predetermined arc. The patient was scheduled to die. The ACLS protocol was a theatrical necessity, social ritual that satisfied the living. The astute astromedic observes the transits before the code and knows the rhythm will not hold. So our teaching point is when a patient presents with a Mars-ruled crisis under a transiting conjunction to a malefic fixed star, do not exhaust resources. The chart marks the exit. Your role is to ensure the predetermined departure is as undisturbed as possible. The algorithm is written in the sky, not in the AHA guidelines. All right. Moving on to the obstetric emergency and the moon's nodal return. A case of cord prolapse and emergency cesarean. So obviously the patient is a female, 32, G2P1 at 39 weeks gestation, arrived at the ER at 14/22, October 3rd of next year, after spontaneous rupture of membranes at home, followed by a sensation of something in the vagina. On examination, a pulsatile umbilical cord was found prolapsed. Immediate obstetric code, the mother was rushed to the OR for an emergency cesarean. The infant was delivered at 14:58, Apgars 2 and 7 with full neurological recovery. The mother experienced a massive postpartum hemorrhage requiring transfusion. Both survived as their charts dictated they would. Let's look at the natal chart of the mother. We see she has Sun at 11 degrees Libra in the 8th house. She has Moon at 28 degrees Cancer in the 5th house. It's conjunct Rahu at 0 degrees Leo with the ascendant 6 degrees Aquarius. Venus, 18 degrees Scorpio in the 9th, ruler of the 5th house of children. Mars, 3 degrees Capricorn in the 11th, sitting with the Sun. No, it's not. I read that wrong. Alright, this is what no sleep does, people. The fixed event decoded. So at the moment of membrane rupture and cord prolapse, 14/22, the transiting moon was at 29 degrees Cancer, exact upon the mother's natal moon and within 1 degree of her natal Rahu. The moon rules the 5th house of children, childbirth, and her chart. The final degree of Cancer, the anaretic degree, is a well-documented crisis point in medical astrology. It's a last moment life or death crisis during the birthing process. The cord prolapse was the physical manifestation of the Rahu's demand for a dramatic birth story, one that would imprint the child's own chart with a Scorpio ascendant and a 12th house Pluto, a child born of crises. Transiting Mars in Libra, 8th house ruler, co-ruler of surgery, formed an exact trine to the mother's natal Venus in Scorpio, ruler of her 5th at the moment the scalpel met skin. The trine guaranteed survival, but the involved signs, Libra, Scorpio, dictated the method. An emergency C-section, violent and swift, followed by hemorrhage, Scorpio's bleeding, 8th house blood loss. The astromedic observing the transit board at 1422 would note the moon's anaretic placement and say, the child will be born within the hour, by knife, with a brush, with the underworld. Both will remain. The script calls for a 1200 ml blood loss. The actual estimated blood loss was 1250 ml. The Iranian precision leaves no room for doubt. So our teaching point here is obstetric emergencies are always lunar nodal events. Always. When the transiting moon hits the anaretic degree in a mother's 5th house, a crisis birth is imminent. Do not panic. The outcome, survival or not, is already locked in the 5th house ruler's aspects. In this case, Venus trine Mars guaranteed life. Had the aspect been a square to Saturn, the script would have been different. The astromedic's task is not to pray for a good outcome, but to read the outcome in the angles and prepare the team for the predetermined sequence. People will laugh and say astrology is bullshit. Most people. All right. Essay number 3, the psychiatric code in the Neptune station. A case of acute psychotic break with self-harm. So our patient here is a female who's 24, brought in by the police under involuntary commitment at 23:05, January 7th of next year. The patient was found standing in the middle of a frozen lake, claiming she was melting the ice with the fire of the new sun. She had cut the word Aeon into her left forearm with a piece of glass. In the ER, she required physical restraint and emergency sedation, ketamine 200 mg IM. Toxicology screen, negative. Known diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder, non-compliant with lithium. She was admitted to the psychiatric ICU. Over the following 6 weeks, she would experience a complete spontaneous remission, discharging herself against medical advice on February 22nd, the day her progressed moon entered Leo. Her psychiatrist called it a miracle of medication. The chart called it the end of a Neptune transit. So what do we see here? The individual has Sun at 14 degrees Capricorn in the 3rd house. Moon at 17 degrees Pisces in the 5th house, in wide opposition to Pluto. 29 degrees Scorpio rising. 3 degrees Aquarius Mercury, the 4th house, tightly squaring Uranus. Neptune, 8 degrees Aquarius in the 4th house, conjunct Mercury, square Uranus. Saturn, 28 degrees Pisces in the 5th house, conjunct the moon. So a lot of aspects, a lot of planets sitting with each other and doing things. So here's the fixed event decoded. Well, on January 7th, 2027, transiting Neptune was at 23 degrees Pisces, station retrograde at 22 degrees Pisces. This is not the truth. In the western side of it, all right? Directly on the patient's natal moon, Saturn conjunction in Pisces in the 5th house. This is also conceptual. So Neptune station is a magnifying lens. When it lands on a natal moon, Saturn, the emotional body is crushed under a wave of eternal sorrow and then dissolved entirely into a messianic complex. The patient's Aeon carving was a literalization of Neptune's promise, a new cosmic age written in blood. The frozen lake was a Piscean ocean, the fire her Neptune-driven delusion. Critically transiting Mars was at 3 degrees Gemini, forming an exact square to her natal Mercury-Neptune square Uranus. Mars, Mercury, Uranus, the impulsive, communicative self-harm, the word carved into flesh. The police found her at 22:30, precisely as the transiting moon crossed her 12th house cusp. She was invisible to herself, a ghost in the machine of her own mind. The remission at 6 weeks was not healing. It was the simple mechanical separation of transiting Neptune from the exact degree of her moon. Progressed moon's ingress into Leo on February 22nd activated her natal 5th house sun, the ruler of her Leo 9th house of meaning, giving her the temporary fire to declare herself cured. Her lithium non-compliance was never a choice. It was a fixed feature of her Mercury-Uranus square, a refusal to be bound by chemical consistency. Her psychiatrist's sense of accomplishment is itself a fated illusion, a feature of his own Jupiter-Neptune transit at the time. Teaching point is psychiatric emergencies or Neptunian positions. When transiting Neptune stations on a natal moon or Mercury, the boundary between psyche and cosmos dissolves. Physical restraint and sedation are the predetermined physical countertransits, Saturnian boundaries. Do not congratulate yourself on calming the patient. You are simply the instrument of the next chart section. The remission is already scheduled. Essay 4. Alright. The trauma activation in the Mars-Uranus square, a case of multiple trauma from a motor vehicle collision. Alright. So, the patient is a male, 42, unrestrained driver, brought in by a helicopter after a high-speed T-bone collision at 8:42 September 1st of next year. On arrival, GCS-6 intubated on scene. Injuries: open book pelvic fracture, splenic laceration with hemoperitoneum, right femur fracture, traumatic brain injury with subdural hematoma. Massive transfusion protocol activated. Taken directly to the OR for damage control, laparotomy, and splenectomy. He survived the surgery, was maintained in the surgical ICU for 34 days, and was discharged to a rehabilitation facility on October 5th. His recovery was called miraculous by the trauma team. The chart shows it was an exact, predetermined sequence. Native has Sun, 8 degrees Virgo in the 6th house, the house of illness. Moon, 1 degrees Aries in the 1st house, the physical body. Ascendant at 15 degrees Pisces. Mars at 19 degrees Gemini in the 4th house, the ruler of the 1st house, the body. And the 8th house, death transformation. Uranus at 22 degrees Scorpio in the 9th house. As well as Pluto at 10 degrees Virgo in the 6th house, conjunct the Sun and squaring Mars. So here is the fixed event decoded. On the morning of the accident, transiting Mars was at 17 degrees Gemini, exactly conjunct the patient's natal Mars at 19 degrees Gemini, within the 2-degree activation zone. Mars is a ruler of his ascendant, physical body, in his 8th house, surgery, near death. The Mars return is the body's fated day of violent self-encounter. Transiting Uranus at 14 degrees Gemini was also applying to the conjunction with natal Mars, forming the chaos activation signature. The sudden, shocking impact Uranus to the body itself, Mars, 1st house ruler. The exact Mars-Uranus conjunction perfected 2 days later, but the patient's natal Mars was already triggered by the approaching transit, and the square from transiting Neptune and Aries to his natal Pluto produced a fog of unconsciousness at the moment of impact. So the accident occurred at 8:42, and at that precise moment, the transiting moon was at 21 degrees Taurus, forming an exact and conjunct 150 degrees to the patient's natal ascendant at 15 degrees Pisces. The inconjunct is the aspect of the unanticipated twist, the sudden, sickening turn of events that no one sees coming. The moon in Taurus' neck, throat, because Taurus triggered the intubation necessity. The pelvic fracture was the Taurus-ruled sacrum, and pelvis shattering under the inconjunct's discordant note. Survival was never in question to the trained astromedic. Natal Jupiter at 12 degrees Sag in the 9th was receiving an exact trine from the transiting Rahu at 12 degrees Leo. The node, the mouth of destiny, trined the greater benefic. The soul was not scheduled to exit the body. The splenectomy was Mars in Gemini, dual organ in the 4th house, the hidden bloody cavity. The 34-day ICU stay precisely mirrored the transiting Sun's journey from the 6th house cusp through the 12th house of hospitalization. Discharge on October 5th occurred under a transiting Venus trinatal ascendant, a smooth, graceful exit from the institutional threshold. Our teaching point here is that the trauma activation is always a Mars transit to natal Mars or the ascendant ruler with a simultaneous Uranus shock. When you see this combination, prepare the trauma bay. The outcome, survival or death, is determined by the aspects to the natal Jupiter and the 8th house ruler. In this case, Jupiter trine node guaranteed life. Your trauma protocol is the earthly echo of the celestial trine. Do your work, but do not imagine you have saved anyone. You have simply occupied the predetermined role in the trauma drama. All right, the anomalous death and the undiagnosed chart. Let's talk about case study infant death syndrome, SIDS, in the ER. So, patient is a female infant, aged 4 months, 3 days, brought to the ER by distraught parents, 6:15 a.m., December 21st. The father had found her unresponsive in her crib. On arrival, asystole, fixed and dilated pupils, no signs of trauma, full resuscitation attempted per protocol for 35 minutes without return of spontaneous circulation. Time of death called 6:50 a.m. The autopsy would later return a diagnosis of SIDS. There was no anatomical or toxicological cause. The chart, however, shows the cause with perfect clarity. So the infant the infant's natal chart. Mainly we're looking at the Sun, the Moon, the Ascendant, Mars, Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto. These 7 are the main 7 we need. So, 26 degrees Scorpio Sun in the 8th house, the house of death. 3 degrees Capricorn in the 10th house, Moon. 18 degrees Leo Ascendant. 12 degrees Libra in the 3rd house, ruler of the 4th house, the grave. With Saturn at 9 degrees Pisces in the 7th house, in opposition to the natal Moon. Neptune at 15 degrees Pisces in the 8th house, the house of death, conjunct the 8th house cusp. So we're seeing a lot of action already. Okay, so this is in opposition. And Pluto is at 18 degrees Capricorn in the 5th house, squaring the natal Mars. So here's the fixed event decoded. The infant was born with the natal Sun in the 8th house of death, tightly opposing the Pleiades, the weeping sisters, at 26 degrees Taurus. In medical astrology, a natal Sun in the 8th house is not a symbol of a long life. The infant had a fixed appointment with the end. The 4-month mark is a critical astrological node for SIDS, corresponding to the first square of the transiting Sun to the natal Sun. On December 21st, the transiting Sun was at 29 degrees Sash, forming an exact semisextile, 30 degrees, to the natal Sun at 26 degrees Scorpio, and squaring the transiting nodes. The child's life force was flickering at the cusp of a solar arc. The death occurred at approximately 5 a.m., the time the father placed her in the crib per report, with the transiting moon in Gemini in the infant's 11th house, void of course. A death under a void of course moon is, in our doctrine, a quiet, unmoored exit, a soul slipping away without karmic interference. Transiting Mars was at 18 degrees Libra, exactly squared the infant's natal Pluto at 18 degrees Capricorn. Mars-Pluto, the sudden cessation, the breath stolen, at the time of death called 6:50, transiting Saturn at 14 degrees Pisces, was exactly conjunct the infant's 8th house Neptune. The final dissolution of the physical form. The astromedic who received the infant in the ER, had they consulted the natal chart upon registration, would have seen the Scorpio Sun in the 8th, the Mars-Pluto square, and the VOC moon, and known. Resuscitation is a ritual of comfort for the parents, not a medical intervention. The infant's script ended here. The parents' grief, while terrible, was also written. The mother's natal chart shows a Chiron in the 5th house transited by the same Mars-Pluto square. The entire family system was entangled in a predetermined tragedy. Teaching point here is SIDS is not a mystery. It is a natal signature. Sun or the 8th house cusp ruler in hard aspect to Pluto, Saturn or the fixed star cluster of the Pleiades. The ER's role is to perform the predetermined ritual of attempted resuscitation, to honor the parental transit of shock, then to guide them toward the grief that was always their path. The astromedic offers not hope, but the cold, compassionate truth. Your child was a brief, perfect chord. Her song was always 4 months long. You were chosen to sing it. All right. The chronic conditions, acute crises, and the Saturn return. Here's a case of a diabetic ketoacidosis in a 29-year-old. So, individual is male, 29, has type 1 diabetes since age 9, and is brought to the ER by his roommate after 3 days of vomiting, polyuria, and confusion. On arrival, glucose 620 mg DL, pH 7.1, ketones large. Diagnosis: severe diabetic ketoacidosis, DKA. Treatment is aggressive IV fluids, insulin drip, potassium replacement. The patient responded rapidly and was discharged after 3 days with a new resolve to finally take control of his diabetes. Chart shows this crisis was the exact product of his Saturn return, and the resolve will dissolve by the next Neptune square. I will mention Rahu here briefly. So, Sun at 24 degrees Aquarius in the 6th is chronic illness, okay? Moon at 16 degrees Virgo in the 1st house is body awareness, blood sugar monitoring. 29 degrees Leo rising. 14 degrees Aries in the 8th house, Saturn, the Lord of Time in the house of crises, okay? Neptune at 22 degrees Capricorn in the 5th house. Pluto at 19 degrees Scorpio in the 3rd house. And Rahu at 9 degrees Virgo in the 1st house, sitting with the moon. And then Sun is in the 6th house. So how do we decode this? Well, the patient is in the exact midst of his Saturn return. Saturn in Aries transiting his natal Saturn in Aries. Saturn returns in the 8th house are classic for a life or death health crisis that forces a confrontation with mortality. On March 17th, transiting Saturn was at 14 degrees Aries, exact upon its natal position. Saturn return perfection date was February 28th, but the crisis precipitated as transiting Mars entered Cancer on March 15th, forming a square to both natal and transiting Saturn. Mars in Cancer squares Saturn in Aries, a cardinal square that ignites the pancreatic furnace. Mars rules acute inflammation, Saturn to chronic structural weakness. The DKA was the body's predetermined Saturnian exam. Transiting Moon at the time of the arrival was in Capricorn, conjunct the patient's natal Neptune, and squaring his natal Moon in Virgo. The Moon Virgo, the body's glucose rhythm. The square from transiting Moon Neptune, complete blurring of the body's signals. The patient had stopped checking his blood sugar 3 days prior, not out of negligence, but because Neptune's fog made him feel quote-unquote fine. His roommate's discovery was triggered by a trine between transiting Venus and the roommate's natal Mars, a fated intervention. The rapid recovery and the discharge resolve are illusions of a Saturn return's initial discipline. The astromedic reviews the chart and knows this patient's Neptune in Capricorn will be squared by transiting Jupiter in Leo, producing an overconfidence that will lead to a second, more severe DKA episode by year's end. Teaching resident should note the follow-up appointment is already fixed for a date that aligns with the next transit. Offer the insulin adjustment, but know it is a temporary tuning of a body that will continue its predetermined oscillation between crisis and remission. The Saturn return in the 8th house is the diabetic's unavoidable reckoning. The DKA is a physical manifestation of the return. Do not moralize about compliance, because the non-compliance is a transit, not a character flaw. Your IV fluids are the Saturnine boundary you are fated to pour. The rest belongs to the stars. The sepsis and the Pluto transit, a case of urosepsis in the elderly. Female, 86, nursing home resident, brought to the ER at 11:30 a.m. Chief complaint, altered mental status, fever, hypotension. History of dementia, recurrent UTIs. Vitals, temp 39.1C, BP 8240, HR 124, RR 30, lactate 5.2 MMO1L. Diagnosis is septic shock, secondary to urinary tract infection. Sepsis protocol was initiated, broad spectrum antibiotics, fluid resuscitation, vasopressors. The patient was transferred to the ICU. She died at 3:33 a.m. June 11th, 2 days later with her daughter holding her hand, a moment the daughter later called a gift of closure. Chart reveals the closure was a predetermined Neptune-Venus conjunction. All right. So, 4 degrees Cancer in the 10th house. And this, the sun placement. Moon is at 23 degrees Pisces in the 7th house. The fading light. 19 degrees Virgo rising, body as fragile vessel. Mars at 19 degrees Gemini in the 9th house. Ruler of the 8th house, death. Pluto, 17 degrees Cancer in the 11th house, a transformer in her 11th house of community. Neptune at 27 degrees Virgo in the 1st house, the souls dissolve, conjunct the ascendant. Saturn at 10 degrees Scorpio in the 2nd house. So, what we see here is the elderly patient's chart is a map of eventual dissolution, because why? Neptune is conjunct the ascendant in Virgo, so the body is inherently permeable, boundaryless. The urinary tract, Virgo's abdominal rulership, is a portal of exit. On June 9th, transiting Pluto at 14 degrees Aquarius formed an exact opposition to her natal Pluto in Cancer, within the 3-degree orb for a major event. Pluto opposing Pluto, the end of a cycle, the final transformation. Transiting Mars at 18 degrees Gemini was exact on her natal Mars, ruler of her 8th house of death. Mars on Mars, the body's warrior, is called to its final battle. Transiting Neptune at 27 degrees Pisces formed an exact opposition to her natal ascendant Neptune in Virgo. So the soul's mirror, reflecting the dissolution back to the body. The septic shock was the physical mechanism. The astral mechanism was a Neptune opposition, a final merger with the infinite. So the daughter's presence at the deathbed at 3:33 a.m. June 11th was itself encoded. Transiting Moon was at 4 degrees Taurus, exactly sextile the patient's natal Sun at 4 degrees Cancer, and trine the daughter's natal Moon. The exact time of death coincided with the Moon's conjunction with the fixed star of gentle passage, and Venus, ruler of the 8th, from the ascendant and close trine to the patient's natal Venus. The gift of closure was a Venusian coda. Sepsis in the elderly is a Pluto transit. The ER team cannot beat the septic shock. They can only administer the predetermined antibiotics that will or will not intersect with the chart's recovery aspect. In this case, there was no recovery aspect. The antibiotics were a ritual of care, not a cure. Astromedic's role is to recognize a Pluto opposition and shift the team's goal from aggressive intervention to palliative witnessing. The daughter's arrival is not luck, it is a transit. Prepare the quiet room. Alright. Now I'm going to go over my appendix. I just have one section here. It's a glossary of medical astrology terms for the ER. Anaretic degree, final degree, 29 degrees of any sign, a point of intense crisis and completion in medical astrology. When a transiting planet toward a moon hits this degree in a natal chart, a life or death medical event is often triggered. Alright. Iranian precision is the astroscience's core standard have exact correlation where every medical event and its outcome are statistically mapped to transits to the minute. No variance is acknowledged. The decumbent chart is a chart cast for the moment a patient takes to their sick bed or first presents with symptoms. In the ER, the decumbent is cast for the arrival time or time of onset, and it provides an immutable prognosis for the acute illness. High leg, or giver of life. In traditional medical astrology, the planet or point in the natal chart that indicates the length of life. A threatened high leg by transit often corresponds to a near-death experience or actual death. The Astrosciences core uses a quantum-weighted high leg calculation. Mars activation. Any transit of Mars to a natal malefic, Saturn, Pluto, Uranus, or the ascendant 8th house ruler, indicating a sudden violent physical event. Trauma, hemorrhage, acute inflammation. When the ER sees a Mars activation, the trauma bay is prepared automatically. Medical VOC moon. A moon that is VOC at the time of a medical event indicates a condition that will not resolve in the expected way. Void of course moon. Often leading to a quiet passing of misdiagnosis or procedure that yields no definitive result. Surgeries initiated during a VOC moon are predicted to have ambiguous outcomes. Neptune possession, a psychiatric emergency characterized by loss of ego boundaries, delusions, and a sense of cosmic mission triggered by a hard Neptune transit, natal Mercury, moon, or ascendant. The patient is not psychotic. They are temporarily submerged in the Neptunian ocean. Or maybe they are psychotic. Who knows? Maybe we all are psychotic. You know? Who's really the judge? You know? Who can really decide? Alright, Saturn return crisis, 8th house. A health crisis at age 29 or 58 that forces a confrontation with mortality, triggered by transiting Saturn returning to its natal position in the 8th house. It is an unskippable examination of the body's structural integrity. And Uranian shock is a sudden, unexpected event like cardiac arrhythmia, seizure, trauma, triggered by a hard Uranus transit to a personal planet or an angle. Shock is always precisely timed. And let me see here. I think this is in my next video, I'll save it. We're going to have a follow-up. The Somatic Zodiac, Compendium of Corporal Astrology, Blood, Organs, and the Determined Flesh. I hope to see you there with peace and love. Piscean out.